Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is wonderful to see so many people here. The cliche is sold out crowd, and it happens to be factually correct in these circumstances. We are here for a very special occasion, and that is to mark the 70th anniversary of the University of Southampton. So welcome to the university. Welcome to our alumni, our supporters, our students who are here, the wider university community. It is absolutely wonderful that you could join us today, and we hope we make your afternoon worth your time for having joined us indeed. My name is Russell Bentley. I'm the head of the Department of Politics and International Relations, and I'm also a professor in the department, and I will be hosting our event this afternoon. And now, on to our main event. It has been an extraordinary few years. I don't think I need to tell you that. A lot has been happening. I don't know when to begin when a lot has been happening, but it's been happening for a long time. And I kind of wish it would slow down because I'm a little bit scared to open the newspapers every day. But today I'm very delighted to be welcoming back to the university Jon Sopel, one of our favorite guests, one of our most popular guests, and certainly one of our most engaging and interesting guests. Jon, as you know, is a graduate of the university. He graduated in 1981. I'm sure he's delighted to be reminded of that. With a BSc, Politics and Sociology. He remained at the university after he graduated. He was elected Students' Union president. And in 1983, he began an illustrious journalism career. He joined BBC Radio Solent here in Southampton as a reporter and a producer. In 2014, Jon was appointed BBC's North America editor, and it was through Jon's eyes and through his reporting that the UK witnessed and learned about the highs and lows, and there were some mighty lows, of American politics. From Trump's Twitter spats to shocking and tragic events to the 6th of January 2021, when Trump supporters invaded the Capitol building of the United States. Jon has reported on all of that. He's made sense of all of that for us. One of my colleagues has described the current world situation as the world is on fire. Well, Jon has helped us see through the smoke and shown us what's going on and helped us make some sense of it. These days, Jon is working with Emily Maitlis on a daily news podcast that is produced by Global, I believe is the name of the company. They are the parent company of LBC, Capital, Classic FM, and I believe some others. So taking that expertise in very interesting directions. We're also honored that Jon is a pro-chancellor of the University of Southampton. And like you all, we are very pleased that he could join us in person after our very popular and well-received online conversation in March of last year. Jon, welcome back to the University of Southampton.
Russell, thank you very much. I almost didn't recognize myself by that description, but I loved every second of it.
Thank you, Jon. Your check is cleared.
I don't trust you. Don't believe it.
Jon, there's just so much going on in the world. I really didn't know where to start this conversation. But I think there's something that's on, if not on the front page of every newspaper every day, it's certainly at the forefront of our minds. There is astonishingly a land war going on in Europe in the 21st century. And I'm not certain very many people expected that to be taking place. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has shocked everyone. But I want to take this in the direction of American politics. When Joe Biden ran for office, he didn't run on foreign policy. You don't win American presidential elections on foreign policy. He ran as a domestic policy man. But he's been forced into this mold now of a foreign policy president. What's your take on, what is this telling us about Joe Biden's leadership? What's his style now? What have we found out about him as a result of it?
It's a really interesting question. I'm going to go back a few months, if I may, which is because actually I think that so far in very difficult circumstances, Biden is having a very good war in terms of the leadership, in terms of the reinvigoration of NATO, in terms of the sense that there is some purpose to the Western alliance and the liberal democracies, of which America is the most powerful player. I also think that there is something absolutely remarkable happened strategically, which America did at the start of this, which was to declassify the most classified information and put it out there exactly what Russia was planning. Now, I suspect if I had been sitting here in 2004, after the invasion of Iraq and Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction, and I was out there covering that, waiting for the weapons of mass destruction to come raining down, and it really was terrifying because we thought this was real, you've been saying, well, what an enormous intelligence failure by the United States that they knew absolutely nothing of what was going to happen and unfold in Iraq. And spool forward to February of this year, and American intelligence has been absolutely on the money about everything that Putin was about to do in the face of all the denials. And that played a really important part in allowing Ukraine to sort of get its act together a bit and plan for defense, and for the West to work out what it was going to do. So I think in that sense, that's gone very well. But compare it to the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was so calamitous. I cannot believe how cack-handed it was. And that spoke to all that was bad about Biden. He is, it's easy to portray it that, you had Barack Obama, and then you had Donald Trump going in the opposite direction, and then you had Biden going back again. I'm not sure it was as different as all that. I think that Biden, Trump, and Obama, there was a sense of we need to withdraw from these conflicts, we need to get American troops home. I mean, this sounds like a really flippant and glib thing to say, but the Taliban have a fighting season like in England we have the cricket season. It broadly speaks takes place in the summer months. It's too cold to fight in the middle of winter, and that's when the Taliban tribal leaders, they go home to their tribal homelands and they don't fight. Biden announces that the withdrawal from Afghanistan is going to take place by September the 11th, very neatly, the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And the Taliban said, oh, well, we know what our target is. That's the fighting season. Bring it on. And they did. And it looked absolutely appalling for America as C-130s were trying to go down the runway at Kabul airport with people clinging to the side of the plane. And I thought hearing that the Taliban, kind of for my sins, I was also there in 2001, moving with the front line with the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan. And you could see, I remember I was in I'm distracting myself. Excuse me. I remember I was in a town called Talakan in northern Afghanistan, and it was a town that had just fallen and from Taliban control, and the Northern Alliance, backed by the American forces, had moved in. And we found the girls' school, and the girls' school had been turned into a weapons store. And it kind of breaks my heart that 20 years later, girls are not getting a proper education again in Afghanistan. And I thought it was a huge failure of American foreign policy. I think what's happening in Ukraine, I think it's uncertain the way this pans out. But all the strategic miscalculations have come from Putin. And I think that the Americans have been adroit. I think they have built something of a coalition. I mean, I think the world, it's not quite the world against Russia. It's the West against Russia. India, the Gulf countries, they're sitting it out, crossing their arms and saying, well, this is your war, this isn't our war. Yeah. And so I think there are some concerns there. But I think that, and one other thing, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about it, which I think is so unusual for the United States of America today, and it shouldn't be abnormal, but it is. You've had Republicans and Democrats working together, taking a common position on to get them to take a common position on anything is virtually impossible, but on this they have.
Yeah, that's actually quite interesting. It's, any of the current crop of Republicans talking to the Democrats is pretty astonishing. So you've given us a picture of two very divergent views of Joe Biden. Ukraine got it right, sharing of intelligence, incredible. Afghanistan, quite a screw up. Those are two different legacies for Joe Biden. Every president worries about their legacy. In fact, their inaugural addresses are usually a rather hopeful statement of what they want it to be. What can we say about Joe Biden's future legacy, given what you just told us?
So the polling data in the United States can be very contradictory. So at the moment, you've got polling data in America saying we've got to be super tough with Russia, and we've got to do everything we can to stop the will of Putin in eradicating a sovereign nation. We don't want our boys to get involved. Well, so you don't really want the strongest response then, do you? Because the strongest response might. And I'm fascinated by what happens. Is there a point at which America does say, okay, didn't want to be here, but we are now getting involved? You know, is it... Biden has said the use of chemical weapons would be a red line, but we don't know what crossing it would mean. What if Putin got really desperate and he's not achieving his objectives by conventional warfare? And you listen to the latest reports from Kharkiv today, where Russia is withdrawing, it sounds like they're not achieving strategic objectives. If a battlefield nuclear weapon is used, is that a red line that brings America in, brings NATO in? And of course, you know, there is ambiguity from the Americans in direct answer to that question, and it's not surprising because they don't want to reveal their hand, or maybe they don't quite know themselves what they would do. A lot of this is tied up with American public opinion. And I think one of the things that I really learned from my 7 years as North America editor, 7+ years, is that we kind of think that America is thinking about these issues the whole time, about its position in the world and what needs to happen in the West and what should happen, whether we should be pivoting to Asia and all those big questions. Look, I bet you if we turned on American TV now, where it was sort of late morning in America, they will be talking about the price of filling up with gas at the petrol pumps. That is their main concern. I mean, God forbid, petrol has gone over $4 a gallon. We dream of $4 a gallon in this country. It will be about the cost of filling up a basket full of groceries at the supermarket. So America is very domestically focused. And whilst on the one hand, they want a firm response against Russia, if commodity prices are going to go through the roof, and commodity prices, the problems that we have inflation here are the same as you have in America, then, hang on, how much do I really want to support Ukraine if I can't afford to fill up my truck or my car or whatever it happens to be? And so I think that it's unclear whether, look, if Russia is defeated and Russia, and you know, there are kind of, I mean, stating the bloody obvious, there are three outcomes. Russia wins, Russia loses, it's a stalemate. I mean, personally at the moment, it's looking like a very long stalemate. But if there is a kind of Russian withdrawal, Putin is overthrown, someone more Western friendly takes over. I think this is all pretty fanciful, if, then that would look very good for Biden. Yes. But I think that his leadership over this has been vindicated after a very shaky start on it. And I think America, you know, so for example, I was in Paris last week at a conference, and there had been a lot of talk about Europe needs to reassert its own defensive policy, and we need to get away from kind of being, you know, the junior cousins to America. I think the rest of Europe is feeling pretty happy to have America in the driving seat back again, as we always have historically. And I think that And I think that, so that is, Biden came in promising that America would be back. He's now delivering on that.
I wonder if he's going to get credit for that.
Oh, I think he'll get credit on domestic issues. I think that the next election will be fought on the price of gas, culture wars, where we are with certain other things. I don't think Ukraine will feature large unless something decisive has happened.
Unless Americans are fighting, perhaps.
Yeah, and then that would be a very different...
Then all bets are off.
All bets are off.
Right. That is absolutely fascinating, and I could talk to you for hours just about that. But let's talk about domestic American politics. And when we think about domestic American politics, you've got to think about Congress, you've got to think about the great clash over policies and personalities in the House of Representatives or the Senate, disputes with the administration and the executive branch. But at the heart of the American system is this thing that we're very proud of, our Constitution. And at the heart of that is the interpretation of the Constitution, and that's done by the Supreme Court of the United States, which makes it a profoundly important part of the political system that almost no one seems to talk about very much. One term of office, Donald Trump appoints 3 Supreme Court justices. I don't know if that's unprecedented, but it's extraordinary. It shifts the court very much to the right. Joe Biden does appoint 1 justice quite recently, which sort of maintains a kind of balance on the left-wing side of it, but it's now very much a right-wing court. We are already starting to see some pretty seismic changes that are going to come out of this, and this does affect directly domestic politics. Talk us through some of these seismic changes. What do you think this is going to mean for a generation with this change of tone in the court?
Yeah. Hands up anyone here who can name me any British member of the Supreme Court. Our Supreme Court.
This will be on the exam.
The Supreme Court does not matter in this country in the way that it does in the US. And a similar audience in America would name all the Supreme Court, or a lot of the Supreme Court justices, because it plays such a vital role in American life. And Donald Trump's legacy will, yes, be January the 6th, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about that dreadful day in America. But the real lasting legacy of Donald Trump is the conservativization, what a terrible word, of the courts, not just the Supreme Court, but all manner of different courts in America. And Donald Trump, when he was running for election, and people were thinking, come off it, Donald Trump is president, you must be joking. Donald Trump did a deal with this body called the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society have this slate of very conservative judges who they want to see appointed to more senior courts in the land, so to federal courts around America. And Donald Trump said, you give me your support, I will appoint from your list of judges who you want to see appointed. And so now to the Supreme Court, you have Gorsuch, then Brett Kavanaugh, and then Amy Coney Barrett. And you've now essentially on a 9-person court got a 6-3 conservative majority, and you are about to see, it seems, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which gives women a right to an abortion. This will be enormous in what it means for social America, the social fabric of America. I would argue to you that, and you can already see in Texas, in Oklahoma, in the Deep South, already states are putting in place provisions that make it virtually impossible to get an abortion under any circumstances. Roe versus Wade doesn't ban abortion. It just means that you are not under any compunction as a state to provide abortion facilities. So people will be able to go to more liberal jurisdictions. They'll be able to go to Massachusetts, or they'll be able to go to Vermont, or they'll be able to go to Oregon or whatever to get an abortion. But if you're poor and you don't have the wherewithal, it will be back-to-back street abortions in those sort of communities. That is what conservative Christians have wanted and campaigned for. And America has been gripped by culture wars for the last 4 or 5 decades. And now you have got a Supreme Court that looks like it might deliver on those things. So I was in Washington when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of gay marriage. And Obama was president, and the White House was lit up in sort of rainbow colors. And on the streets of Washington, which is a very liberal city, there was kind of a huge outpouring of emotion at this. Well, is that going to get reversed next? And where does it go? So if you look at all the big issues that you think of, what do you think of when you think of America? You think of guns. Well, gun law is decided in the Supreme Court. The big cases that were brought which liberalized gun laws went to the Supreme Court. If you think about gay rights, if you think about abortion, women's rights, equal pay, those are all things that were resolved by the Supreme Court. Here, they get resolved in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. The Supreme Court gets involved in technicalities, but it is not setting out the social mores of our country. In America, it is, and already the difference that Donald Trump made in his 4 years of the presidency is being delivered on. And if you're on the Christian right, you will say, this is the success of Trump and the vindication of us backing him.
What's extraordinary about this is it all sounds like the Supreme Court is a political branch and that it's somehow legislating. But what's interesting is the way they couch all of this as, does the federal government have the authority to prevent states from, in this case, banning an abortion or banning the ownership of firearms? And I think that's one of the interesting things about this, is that the court's not actually saying anything about abortion, it's saying what the federal government can do.
It's essentially saying it is wanting to clip the wings of federal government, and there has always been that debate in America between state and Washington, D.C., and how much power should go to the individual states, and that is what we're seeing, and it meaning that the power. I mean, I became fascinated by. I went to America thinking that it's so like Britain. And
I wish I had spoken to you.
And the longer I got there, I thought, oh my God, no, it's as, we've got much more in common with France and Germany and Italy and Spain than we do with the United States of America, and the kind of common language actually, I think, clouds the issue. But broadly speaking, when something happens here, we say, what's the government going to do about it? And in America, they say, what's it got to do with the government? And that is a really interesting difference in mindset. And I think that, what's happening in the Supreme Court is to say, well, government has got no role in any of this. Let individual states decide their own regulations. I think if you're wealthy in America, the overturning of Roe versus Wade won't make any difference at all. You'll still be able to get an abortion somewhere. Will the big companies start offering it as part of their package of benefits? It's going to be fascinating. Or will the tech companies get prosecuted if they enable people, because the data will be available about what they've been offering staff and what they've been helping people? If they help people to get an abortion, will they? I tell you what, just before I left, we were doing a piece about the threat to one of my more junior colleagues had found a woman, and she was traveling out of state to get an abortion, and from Texas, and Texas had passed a law saying you cannot assist in any way someone to get an abortion. And so quite often in the BBC, we would pay a disturbance allowance to someone. If I want you to come on our programme and I say, could you catch the train up to London, please? We'll put you up in a hotel overnight and then we'll send you back by train the next day. We will give you 150 quid to pay. So we said, so this woman who, we wanted to do filming with us, could we pay her? Absolutely not. We would have been breaking the law. We would have been breaking the Texas law, and we had to say, sorry, we can't do it. Because that we would have been seen to be part of, and so it looks quite benign.
Yes.
But actually, when you dig into it, it's a real attempt to change people's behavior. I'm also fascinated in America as well by the fact that the people that are most pro-life also tend to be the most pro-capital punishment.
Yes. Yes. It's the killing of the innocent that they worry about. Because we were talking about the Supreme Court and the appointment of justices, we've already touched on Donald Trump. In a sense, we know his legacy. It's a massive right-wing shift in the Supreme Court. But he's out of office now. We no longer enjoy his social media broadsides. Although they might be coming back on Twitter, depending if the sale goes through to one E. Musk. Donald Trump, though, is still a looming presence. What's his influence in the Republican Party? I know he hasn't gone away. He hasn't disappeared over the horizon. Do the Republicans still care about him that much?
They're terrified of him.
Really?
They're still
Do they think that he can marshal forces that will make their lives very difficult?
Yeah, that's good. So, after the election, which he lost, I'm just going to say that. And
well, that's in dispute.
This isn't Jon Sopel saying he lost. I'll just quickly rattle through it just so that it doesn't look like I'm not even BBC anymore, so I can be as biased as I like to this wonderful audience. Every Secretary of State in the 50 states certified their results as being safe. Trump's Attorney General, William Barr, hardly a bleeding heart liberal, who was appointed because he was fiercely conservative and believed in almost unfettered power of the president, and not three co-equal branches of government according to your constitution, court said there was no fraud that could have affected the outcome of the election. The head of election security said it was the safest election in history. Donald Trump's campaign team challenged in court cases on 63 occasions, as is their right. On 62 occasions, they lost outright. They had a minor victory on whether people should be able to see votes being counted in Pennsylvania. Every process was gone through. Trump lost the election. And yet, on January the 6th, a majority of Republican lawmakers in the House of Representatives voted against certifying Joe Biden's victory. Did they believe there was fraud? No. Were they terrified of incurring the wrath of Donald Trump and what that would do to their re-election chances? Absolutely. They were bloody terrified of him, and he is a man who follows Machiavelli, that it is better to be feared than loved. Although with Donald Trump, he loved to be loved as well. And these people
might
voted...
not have distinguished.
Sorry?
Might not have distinguished.
Yeah. And these are people who should have known better. And they have fostered this feeling. And it is... I can't exaggerate how dangerous it is for democracy. So say at the moment there are 60% of Republicans, this is the latest polling, who still believe the election was stolen. Well, let's say that's exaggerated. Let's say it's 50% of Republican voters think the election was stolen. That means there are 37 million adult Americans who believe that somehow Joe Biden is illegitimate in the White House. That is incredibly corrosive. And people who should have shown some leadership didn't. Now, it happens to be my view that these timid, spineless people actually would love Donald Trump to go away.
Don't hold back just for the audience.
This is Jon Sopel unleashed. I think that they would love Donald Trump to just go away quietly, and who will rid me of this turbulent priest? I mean, I think there is an element that they would love him to go away. I think, and can we do this again in 2 years' time when I will have been proved completely wrong? I think we have passed peak Trump. I think that if Trump runs again, the forces that led to his defeat in 20, that coalition will reform in 24. White college-educated women, people in the suburbs, independents, liberal Republicans. And Donald Trump is unable to move beyond talking about how the election was stolen from him and how the people who protested on January the 6th have been treated so harshly for only wanting to carry out an insurrection and a coup d'etat. Poor them. You don't win an election by looking backwards. And I think Donald Trump is still so consumed by his incomprehension that he's lost the election that I think that he becomes a very difficult candidate. I also think that he will be challenged. And you mentioned Ron DeSantis, who's the governor of Florida. Very interesting character. He is Trumpian, maybe even more Trumpian than Trump. More Trumpy than Trump. That could be a slogan. But he's clever. He is disciplined. He is focused and he knows what he's doing. Now, he's going to challenge. In 2016, when Donald Trump ran, and he's suddenly on a platform with lying Ted Cruz and little Marco and, sleepy Jeb, low energy Jeb, they never didn't know how to handle Donald Trump. They didn't know how to handle his kind of, the bare knuckle fight. They do now. It's going to be different. And if Donald Trump won't want to fight and lose. So I kind of think that maybe we have, as I say, invite me back here, and then you say, Sopel, you don't know what you're talking about. So I think it's possible that we've gone past peak Trump, but what it won't be, one thing I tell you with absolute certainty, it won't be a moderate Republican who will be fighting the next election. It will be someone Trumpian. It doesn't need to be Trump.
We'll be playing all these clips back
thanks.
in a couple of years' time. One of the really, fascinating things about Trump is that he doesn't actually need to run because he's a professional disruptor. All he needs to do is keep maneuvering as if he's going to make everybody quite scared, I think. You've mentioned a few times the 6th of January, and we know that pretty soon after they were sworn in, Congress in 2021 launched an investigation into what happened on the 6th of January that year, when the Capitol was invaded and there was an attempted insurrection, and it did certainly look like someone was planning a coup. How is this playing out, and is any of it going to diminish Trump or his influence in the Republican Party? Is it making any difference at all?
I think it feeds. So there's this commission that was set up that has got all party support, but realistically, it's only 2 or 3 Republicans who are backing the investigation. And the 2 Republicans that are prominently backing the investigation, Dick Cheney's daughter, Liz Cheney, who's the congresswoman from Wyoming, and another guy called Adam Kinzinger, they are going to be deselected or facing very strong deselection moves by Trump supporters who can't believe that that they have carrying out such an act of betrayal for wanting the truth. But the January the 6th Commission has turned up a lot of interesting stuff, even though all sorts of people have not cooperated. And they sent some of their findings to a district judge to have a look at it and to say, has there been potential law breaking by the president and those around him? To which the answer has come back, well, yeah, there was potential law breaking. But there was this fascinating phrase that the district judge used, that what they were engaged in was a coup in search of a legal theory. Give us any kind of means by which we can upend the Constitution and steal this. Now, some people have argued that January the 6th, for all its terribleness, and it was a terrible day in Washington, and I can sort of talk about it a bit, showed the resilience of the US Constitution, shows that although it bent, it didn't break. I would argue that January the 6th showed how vulnerable America could be, how vulnerable our liberal democracies can be to disinformation, untruth, bad actors, and people who are prepared to do anything to take power. And I think it should be a wake-up call to all of us that the liberal democracies that we live in, Britain, my God, is not a perfect place. But it's a hell of a lot better than, say, being in Russia, I would argue. And I think that we shouldn't take any of our institutions for granted. And I think the January the 6th Commission, it's not going to lead to the 34 million Americans that are Republicans who still believe that the election was, they're not going to have a Damascene moment where they go, oh, silly me, I was wrong all along. No. That's not going to happen. America is too polarized for that. But it is, I think it is actually just chipping away, and it's also revealing that some of the people who were outspoken Trump supporters in public were privately saying, what the hell's going on here? And wishing it would go away, but felt they had to show fealty to Donald Trump in public. And I just wonder whether, as I say, we've seen peak Trump.
Some of the extraordinary communications that was going on behind the scenes.
Crazy.
Yes.
With the chief of staff.
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely amazing. I think you've answered this question, but we ended last time, and I'm not ending now. But we ended last time talking about polarization. You just raised it again. Midterm elections in November. People pay attention to these because they're a huge moment in possible changes of legislature in the United States. I don't see any let up in the polarization. What's playing out with the midterms, and how is that working its way through?
Can I just give an example of one of the last elections that I covered in the US before I came back was a governor's election in Virginia. Virginia borders Washington in the north, and it goes down to the sort of, to the tobacco plantations and peanut plantations further south, so largely rural, but with a big liberal base. It's been a liberal state for a long time. And the governor's race was taking place there. So, the governor is like the prime minister of Virginia, and it's, governors are hugely powerful people. Among people who had been vaccinated, the Democrat candidate had a 14% lead going into polling day and lost the election. Most people in Virginia had been vaccinated, but what it meant was that virtually, and I mean like 99.9%, of people who hadn't been vaccinated voted Republican. Now, Britain has its problems with polarization, but I don't think that whether you've been vaccinated or not is an indication of voting behavior. And in America, it was. And if you look at the statistics of COVID deaths, you were 3 times more likely to die of COVID if you were in an area that had strongly voted for Trump in 2020 than it was the case if you were in an area that voted for Joe Biden. So when we talk about polarization, it goes to every part of American life, although maybe with the exception of Ukraine at the moment. And the polarization goes on, and it's partly a function of social media algorithms, which is a huge problem, where essentially your Facebook feed or whatever it happens will only give you what you like and tend to give you more extreme versions. Well, you like that, well, I'm going to give you something even wilder. And so you get people only hearing what they want to hear. And as a journalist who is committed to giving people facts, sometimes very uncomfortable facts, telling people sometimes things they don't want to hear, or is this a huge victory? It's a huge victory, but so doing nuance and shades of grey, I think in the States, as a result of changes that were made in the Reagan era, people don't listen to news to be informed, they listen to news to be affirmed. And I think that is something as well that we need to guard against very carefully here, where I think that BBC, ITV, Sky, my new paymasters, well, soon to be new paymasters global, care about that sort of stuff. I think it's good.
The mapping of vaccination onto voting behavior also maps, I think, nicely onto levels of trust in government expertise and who people believe is telling them the truth. And I think that fits in quite nicely with what you just said about misinformation, polarization. And I think that's something we need to talk about. I think that's probably where, because of time, we will need to end. Misinformation, the media, fractured American politics, a new populism that seems particularly virulent and aggressive. It seems like some kind of genie is out of the bottle, and it's not a very attractive genie at all. But it also shows us the activity of news reporting has undergone an absolutely fundamental change. So this really, in your professional position, and this has to worry you. What does impartial journalism mean now? Does it have a future?
Yeah, Russell, it doesn't just worry me, it terrifies me for the reasons that I have try to set out. Look, it is never my job to tell you how to vote. But it is my job to care that whether you're going to go into a polling station to vote for Brexit or against Brexit, to vote Conservative or Labour or Green or Liberal Democrat or Republican or or Democrat, that you're doing it on the basis of good information. And there are too many actors out there who have gone unchecked, who don't discriminate. It's victory at all costs. And the degree of disinformation, misinformation, is frankly terrifying. And when I hear that even in university lecture theatres, not this one probably, but in others where people are deplatformed because people don't want to hear opposing views, I just do not see how democracy flourishes. We need to listen to people whose views we might find repellent, because actually it sharpens our own arguments. It may make us feel better not to hear an opposing viewpoint, but I don't think it's good for democracy. And I think that there is a battle to be had, and it's a battle that needs to happen right now. And Putin is able to do a lot of what he does because the Russian public are fed a diet of pure government-controlled propaganda. That is not the problem you've got in America, where you've got a multiplicity of viewpoints. It's just that people only ever listen to the viewpoint that they like. And I don't think that's healthy either. So, I got a lot of, in my time covering America, I used to get endless crap on social media about you're anti-Trump, you're so anti-Trump, blah, blah, blah. Actually, it's nothing to do with being anti-Trump or anti-Boris. I think that it's our job as journalists to hold people in power to account, to ask tough questions, to be a bit difficult. I'm not there as their press officers. And so when I wrote these articles, absolutely lambasting Biden for the pathetically awful way he'd handled Afghanistan, the Trump supporters came at me, well, you got him elected. No, I didn't. No, I didn't. I didn't get anyone elected. I'm holding people in power to account. And that's what we need to do. But we need to do that in a way, maybe some of you saw it. My first encounter with Donald Trump was at a news conference. I put my hand up. Where are you from? I go, BBC News, another beauty. And I said, well, we're free, fair, impartial. He goes, you like CNN? And it kind of went on and on like that. And I thought, I'm going to be polite. He can treat me, if he wants to treat me as his enemy, he can. But I'm not his enemy. The Democrats are his enemy. Keir Starmer is Boris Johnson's enemy, or whatever you want to say. Our job is there to ask tough questions of policymakers who govern on our behalf. Our job is to root out bits of corruption or deceit and lies and falsehood when it happens. And I tried to do that in the journalism when I was in America. And I think that democracy flourishes. As I say, I happen to love living in a society where we have got freedom of speech, where we've got the rule of law, where we've got due process, where we've got the peaceful transfer of power at elections. Long may it live, but I'm afraid we can't take any of it for granted.
I don't think you noticed, but you're actually sort of laying a great deal of responsibility on the shoulders of everyone in this room, including ourselves, which is to seek out those viewpoints that we don't agree with and to see what other people are saying and engage with them as fact-respecting citizens rather than people who seek, as you said, affirmation of their views. Jon, you've painted a fascinating, slightly terrifying, always interesting and engaging picture.
No, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic.
That came across very clearly.
No, I am. No, genuinely. I just think that we can't give up on this stuff. I think that I think if we live in a society with so many benefits, a lot of problems, but so many benefits, and we shouldn't lose sight of them, that's all.
I can only agree with you. Very many people died for the things that you're saying we need to stand up for, and so we should stand up for them. Jon, thank you very much. Before we go to questions, round of applause for Jon Sopel, please. Right. Right, thank you very much. We are now opening to questions from our audience. Thank you for turning up the light so I can see people. If you do have a question, please raise your hand. Student ambassador will bring you a microphone. I will try to keep a mental cue of where the questions are coming from. But our first question is already teed up, and that is Ben Dolbeer, the president of the Southampton University Students' Union. Ben.
Thank you. Hi, John.
Ben.
I wanted to ask, how did your time as a student and a president of the Students' Union at Southampton influence the pathways that you took in your career?
Golly, what a big question. Can I remember that far back? Someone asked me...
I can remind you of the year.
Someone asked me at a literary festival in Cheltenham about, did anything you did as president of the Students' Union help you in your coverage of Donald Trump? And I said, 40 years of journalism didn't help me in my coverage of Donald Trump. I think that, look, this university, it encouraged you to think, it encouraged you to question, it allows you to kind of go up on stage and open your mouth and see if words come out, and you might make a fool of yourself one day and you might land a good point another day. I think that education is good for its own sake. I know we're kind of very career focused, but I think having that ability to reason and to argue and to question is fantastically important. And if coming to this university did anything for me, it gave me that, and maybe the confidence to stand up on stage and occasionally make a fool of myself, but hopefully that if I open my mouth, words will come out, they'll broadly speaking form sentences, and people will kind of hopefully understand what you've got to say. And I think that, as I say, I think education is wonderful for the career opportunities it gives us all, but it's also good in itself.
Thank you, John. Now, I did see hands shoot up at the very beginning. That was the first one I saw, so behind you, my friend ambassador. And then I saw a couple of hands over here. Gentleman there will be next, and then we'll be going up to the back.
My name is Rachel Brown. I'm obviously from America, but home is here now. And you're spot on, by the way, in your observations. But it's been said that when America sneezes, the country catches cold. What is the likelihood of the overturn of Roe v. Wade catching on here?
It's a great question.
It's a great question, but I think that... So, I mean, one of the kind of things that fascinated me about America is that you have a complete separation of church and state. In this country, we have an established church. But in America, religion matters far more than it does here. And I don't see the same forces at play and the same cultural issues having the same resonance or getting the same traction that they do in America. And I don't think it will follow the path of America. I should also say, and I answered the question about the Supreme Court and Roe versus Wade just in terms of the social policy aspect of it. Actually, if I'm looking at the politics of it, I think it could be I should have said this earlier when Russell was asking me those questions about Biden's legacy. If Roe versus Wade gets overturned and the Democrats play this cleverly, I think it could be a huge fillip for the Democrats, because successive polls in America show that there are a clear majority who favor keeping Roe versus Wade, and you could have the conservative Christian right out of kilter with the rest of the country, and that it could be a positive advantage. But I mean, I remember kind of being in Iowa for the first round of caucuses when I was there. And, the candidates going to Bible study groups to talk about their understanding of the New Testament and the Old Testament and their favorite Bible passages. I mean, can you imagine Boris Johnson? No. Actually, sorry, do you remember when Trump was asked, what's your favorite, the New Testament or the Old? Well, there are good bits in both. Kind of thought maybe you haven't read that much of either, actually, but anyway.
Not recently. Question over here. Man with his hand up. Get a microphone to him.
I'm John Craig. I was Students' Union President
John!
here in
How are you,
78.
my friend?
Very well, thanks. Great talk, John. 78, 79, a few years before John. John, why did you turn down the chance to be political editor of the BBC?
For the very few people in this room who don't know John Craig, he is the deputy political editor at Sky, and a brilliant man. God, you know what? It was a job that simultaneously kind of excited me and appalled me at the same time. And I saw the abuse that Laura had taken, and I thought, do I want this? And I thought, you know, and it would be doing the same job that I've been doing in America for the previous 7 years. You know, it's appearing on the 10 o'clock news, it's appearing on the Today programme, it's appearing, this sounds like a really in-house media conversation, so apologies for that. And I also worried that the candour that you need to express leads to a lot of problems in coverage in the UK. And I decided that and then this offer came along that was out of the blue, something completely different, and it just seemed, this is new and exciting. And I've always had, you know, there've been one or two occasions where I nearly joined you at Sky when your boss came and spoke to me, and I've always been open to the right offer. And when they kind of global media came along and said, you know, do you and Emily want to do this? It seemed like a kind of, and I think the podcast space is really interesting and really developing. And I thought, I want to give this a go.
Thank you. In the back on my left, yes. Wait for a microphone.
I'd have been so much more careful if I'd known Craig was in the room.
Not a plant. We didn't know he was coming.
Peter Price Law, 1963. My question relates to the BBC. The BBC gives Britain influence round the world. What do you see as its strengths and its weaknesses?
I used to get asked, which bit of the BBC do you work for? It's an easy answer. I work for the B and not the C. And those are the strengths and the weaknesses. The broadcasting bit is what we do well. The corporation bit is what people don't tend to love so much. And I think that we, you know, we face the BBC. I'm still using we. This is what comes of spending nearly 4 decades working for the BBC. I still think the BBC does an absolutely fantastic job, and around the world, it has never been more important in terms of what is happening in Ukraine and Russia, but also around the world at various different times, when that has been a source of news that people can trust. And I think that trust is something that is hard-earned, and I think the British media do a really good job. The bits of the BBC that people don't like, well, I think we live in a more polarised society, so that if you are strongly pro-Labour, you will think that any time there is criticism of a Labour leader, well, you're just a bunch of Conservatives. And I thought that the criticism that came to Laura Kuenssberg and will no doubt come to Chris Mason now will prove that out. And that if you say something that's anti-Tory, well, then you're just a Labour stooge. And I just think that the politicians should know better than that, to accuse journalists of asking tough questions, well, you're just party, you know, pre. And I think that is an unfair criticism that comes to the BBC. But overwhelmingly, do I think that the BBC is one of the crown jewels and has huge soft diplomatic power around the world? I would say it does, and it should continue, and hopefully will continue to flourish, even though there are times when certain members of government may not seem to love it as much as perhaps they should.
Very diplomatically put at points. I saw some hands go up. Over on this side, yes, gentleman who's about to stand up, and then the woman behind him.
Thank you. Paul Bryant, 1959, mathematics. What on earth has gone wrong with political interviewing? What we see almost every morning is the interviewer asking the same question 6 times, getting an answer which is identical 6 times, which is an answer to a different question. It's getting boring. It's getting boring, and it gets me angry.
Do you think the problem is political interviewing or politicians? Okay, just thought I'd ask. I think there are certain times when it is legitimate to ask a question 3 or 4 times, just so that we can be clear that the person is not going to answer it, even though it's very clear what the question is, and that people draw their own conclusions. I think when it becomes just pure theatre, it's pointless and a waste of airtime. I much prefer interviews that are there to get information rather than playing gotcha. And I think that sometimes people go too much in for gotcha. They want heat rather than light. And I think that the purpose of a political interview, a good political interview, is to find stuff out. And I think, look, whether it's on, why do you want to cut the civil service by this much? What are the efficiencies? And, just what is the genuine thinking there? And yet too often the interviews go off at a tandem. I think you're right to a point, but I do think there are times when you can't just say, Minister, is there anything you'd like to tell a grateful nation? Because I don't think that's the right approach either.
Right, thank you. Lady over there wanted to ask a question, and then I'll come to the lady in the front.
Hi, I'm Alice. I'm a second-year international relations student. How do you think the threat of American democracy has and could impact the legitimacy of the US as a dominant world superpower?
I'm not sure it has. I mean, it means that there is less scope for America to lecture others on its electoral arrangements when all that happened on January the 6th happened. But I think the position of global leadership is often set by example as well as raw power. And I think that America has asserted itself pretty boldly. And in a way that kind of a narrative, if you take a 50-year view or a 30-year view, has certainly been the decline of America and the rise of China. I would think that China is looking very closely at what has happened, what America has done in terms of sanctions, in terms of the fact that the dollar is still the reserve currency, and thought, America is still pretty powerful, and we do need to take cognizance of what America says and does. But you're right, there is a certain wariness in European capitals of what happens if in 2024 Donald Trump did come back into power, where the people he seemed to be most attracted to in terms of other world leaders were, the so-called strongmen, and not he had no time for Trudeau, he had no time for Theresa May or Macron or Merkel, but he loved, Putin and Duterte and President Xi and, or Erdogan. And so I kind of think that your question is good, but I think that American leadership is still there, and I think that's mainly economic, because it is still a huge power, but also of the example it leads through, the international bodies.
Thank you very much. We're going to take 2 more questions, and right here in the front.
Thank you. I'm Francesca Barnes, member of council here at the university, and a huge tribute to the effectiveness of your reporting, that I recognised everything that you were talking about there, so thank you very much. But I just
Are you saying I'm repeating myself?
Would I dare? But what I would like to do is just stretch the timeline of your thinking, please, because there's been a lot of news over the last, 10 years, but it feels like there's been too much news. The consequence is that it distracts from some of the really important issues, like we're living on a planet that is going to kick us off fairly shortly. And I'm just wondering what your optimism is, or not, as you leave the United States, about how the US is going to cope and be a leader in climate change management.
It's a great question, and I think you do touch on something that's a really serious problem, which is that the sort of slight sense that we've got attention deficit disorder, that we kind of can't focus on anything for more. COP26, it feels like it was 20 years ago, not a few months ago, given the pace at which everything has happened. And I would sit when I was reporting on Trump on a Monday evening and say, historians are sitting with pens poised to rewrite the narrative of the United States because of what Donald Trump has just done today, and then 48 hours later couldn't remember what it was that Donald Trump had done on Monday. And I think that there is an element of that, and I think that that is most acutely true over climate change, where we are no longer talking about climate change because of what is happening in Ukraine. And I think that we do need to learn to walk and chew gum and to do two things simultaneously. But on the question of American leadership, I think America is taking a more leading role and and I think that the British government were pretty pleased with a lot of the commitments it got from Biden in the run-up to COP26 and during COP26 when he dozed off. Memorably. But I think that and even during the Trump era, when Trump pulled America out of the climate change agreement, there were still a lot of states that were putting in progressive measures to deal with it. But it's a global problem. And the biggest polluters are China and Russia, China and India. And they see they want to develop economically. And of course, and the real danger of Ukraine, which is where you get into the real nightmare problem, is that as fossil fuel prices go up for oil, then countries are going to start thinking, well, maybe we'll reopen that coal-fired power station. And so it is potentially scary. And I still think that the electoral timetable does not work well with long-term economic planning and the planning that is sort of needed to deal with some of these giant climate change issues. So on that, I think it's, will you get the political impetus to make the change necessary? I have my doubts, I'm afraid.
Gentleman in the middle. Yes, the microphone will be with you soon.
Hello, John. You may not remember me, but we served together on the in the Students' Union Committee back in the 80s.
Oh my God.
Peter Arm. In those days, you probably wouldn't have been seen dead in a blue suit, I was going to say, but anyway, jokes apart. Just thinking about back into American politics, somebody said to me the other day that if the Republicans get back in, that they will instigate so many legal changes, it'll be very hard to get the Democrats to get back into power. What do you think in that direction?
Well, there's already legislation along those lines taking place, which which are changing voting laws, which are statewide. They're not federal laws. I mean, every state has its own different voting machines. I cannot understand for the life of me why there are not federal-run elections where there is a set standard of what the rules are. And this seems to me a classic case of where, if you are electing the president of the United States of America, there ought to be, I used to laugh at stubby pencils and kind of plywood voting partitions in the UK. I kind of revere them now, having seen the shambles that unfolds in American elections and the disputes there are over counting machines and the like. Look, there are all sorts of laws, and if you just take Georgia as an example, where, if you've got long queues of people, so typically after church on Sunday, black churches will organise buses and they will take people to polling stations, and that the people will wait in the heat of whatever to vote. And now it is illegal to give bottles of water out to people that are waiting to vote. Now, why would you do that? So then there are measures being taken that will suppress voter turnout. But there's also the whole gerrymandering of electoral districts that takes place in America on a big scale. But actually, surprisingly, the latest sort of numbers that I've seen suggest that the kind of redistricting, as they call it, has actually favoured the Democrats a bit. So there are all sorts of, I mean, you know, American elections are still deeply problematic. And although we are in a post-civil rights era, you should look at some of the laws that have been enacted that suppress turnout in largely black areas. And why make it more difficult for people to vote? Why would you do that? Now, of course, you need to have integrity of the election. And you need to be sure that people are voting fairly and that they are entitled to vote in state. No one could argue against that. But often it's seen that this is tilting into the kind of some of the legislation, you know, undermining the legislation that was passed in the 60s of the Voting Rights Act, which is terrible. So that is worrying. But I still think that, broadly speaking, it's for the politicians and the parties to get out with clear messages and to sell Americans a dream of what it is that they want to vote for. And in 2016, I have no doubt that Donald Trump was the better candidate than Hillary Clinton. I'm just going to say it. He had clearer messaging. He was a better candidate, and he won. But after 4 years of Donald Trump, Joe Biden came in promising empathy, competence, and those things, and he won. And that's how democracy works. And I think I've still got some faith that the people will get what they want.
3 cheers.
Fingers crossed.
We have run out of time, but right now all is left to do is to thank Jon Sopel for a fantastic afternoon with us. Informative, engaging, amusing, and a promise to come back I heard in there a few times. So let's thank Jon. And a final thank you to all of you. You have made this event. Thank you for your questions and your attention. Enjoy the rest of your time here.